The Maplewood Inn sat on the outskirts of town, nestled between a desolate stretch of highway and an expanse of darkened woods. It wasn't the kind of place travelers sought out. It was the kind they settled for when exhaustion made the road ahead unbearable. Faded neon letters flickered weakly above the entrance, casting a sickly glow over the cracked pavement. Ethan pulled into the nearly empty lot, gripping the steering wheel with a sigh. A job was a job, and with rent overdue, he couldn't afford to be picky. The ad had been vague. Night clerk needed. No experience required. Cash pay. That last part had been enough to bring him here. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. Behind the front desk sat a man in his late 50s, his skin pallid under the buzzing fluorescent light. His name tag read Dale. He didn't smile as Ethan stepped forward. "You're the new guy?" Dale's voice was low, almost a whisper. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, Ethan Carter." Dale didn't shake his hand. Instead, he slid a small notebook across the counter. Rules for the night clerk was scrawled in uneven handwriting across the cover. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as he flipped it open. Rule number 1. Never assign room 209. A slow chill crept up Ethan's spine. He glanced at Dale, expecting some kind of explanation, but the man's expression remained unreadable. "There's a master list in the drawer," Dale continued. "If someone asks for a room, check that first. If 209 is the last available, tell them we're full. No exceptions." Ethan forced a chuckle. "Let me guess. It's haunted?" Dale didn't blink. "It's not a joke." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Ethan's throat felt dry. Maybe this was just some initiation prank, a way to mess with the new guy. But Dale's gaze held something unsettling, something that made the air in the room feel colder. Before Ethan could question him further, Dale pulled out an envelope and pushed it forward. "Week's pay up front. You start now." Ethan hesitated, but took the envelope. Cash. No paperwork, no questions. He should have walked out right then, but he didn't. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was far too late. The first few hours of Ethan's shift were uneventful. The motel was eerily quiet, with only 2 guests checked in. One was a trucker who barely grunted when Ethan handed him his key. The other was a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone or something to follow her inside. Ethan busied himself behind the desk, flipping through the motel's outdated records. The place had changed owners several times over the past decade, but one thing remained constant. Room 209 was never occupied. At 1:13 a.m., the phone rang. The sudden noise made Ethan jolt in his chair. He grabbed the receiver. "Maplewood Inn, front desk." Static. A low, humming distortion filled the line. Then, just as he was about to hang up, a voice cut through the interference. "Room 209. Ethan frowned. "Excuse me?" A pause. Then, "I need room 209. The voice was thin, almost mechanical, like it was being played from an old recording. Ethan sat up straighter, his grip tightening on the phone. His eyes flicked to the master list. 209. Do not assign. "Sorry," he said quickly. "That room isn't available." Silence. Then a whisper, so faint he wasn't sure he heard it at all. "He's coming." The line went dead. A cold unease settled in Ethan's stomach, but before he could process it, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. He turned, heart pounding. A man stood outside, illuminated by the flickering neon sign. His clothes were soaking wet, clinging to his thin frame as if he had just crawled out of a river. His skin was pale, almost gray under the artificial light, and his eyes— Ethan couldn't see them clearly, but something about them felt wrong. The man raised a single finger and pointed. directly at room 209. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back from the door, shaking his head. "We're full," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the man outside. The stranger didn't move, didn't blink. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away. Not toward the parking lot, not toward the road, just into the woods, disappearing into the darkness, as if he had never been there at all. A gust of wind rattled the motel sign, making it flicker. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open. Ethan whipped his head toward the sound, room 209, but he hadn't given anyone the key, and the last time he checked, it had been locked. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared down the dimly lit hallway. Room 209's door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the opening. The motel was silent, save for the faint hum of the flickering overhead lights. He swallowed hard. This had to be a mistake. Maybe Dale had left the door unlocked before leaving. Maybe one of the guests had wandered in by accident. Maybe. Reaching under the counter, Ethan grabbed the spare key, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold metal. He told himself he would just take a quick look, confirm that the room was empty, and shut the door. That was all. But with every step down the hallway, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if something unseen was pressing down on him. By the time he reached the door, his breath was coming in shallow gasps. He pushed it open. The room was dark. The heavy curtains were drawn, swallowing any light from the parking lot outside. The scent of damp wood and something faintly rotten clung to the air. Ethan reached for the light switch, flipping it on. The bulb flickered weakly, casting jittery shadows along the peeling wallpaper. The bed was made, the covers untouched. The furniture, old and outdated, sat undisturbed. And yet, something felt wrong. The closet door stood slightly open, just a few inches. Ethan's chest tightened. His grip on the spare key grew slick with sweat. He knew the smart thing to do: walk away, lock the door, pretend he had never seen it open. But something inside him, a gnawing, unnatural curiosity, urged him forward. His hand trembled as he reached for the closet door. A soft scratch sounded from inside. Ethan froze. His mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe a raccoon had somehow gotten in, or one of the pipes was making noise. But before he could move, the door lurched open on its own. A cold gust of air rushed past him, carrying with it a whisper, faint, distant, like a voice calling from the bottom of a well. "He's already inside?" Ethan stumbled backward, heart hammering. His eyes darted around the room, but nothing had changed. The room was empty. The bed was undisturbed. There was no one in the closet. And yet, he felt it. A presence. Something standing right behind him. The light flickered again, and then, just before the bulb burst, plunging the room into darkness. A reflection moved in the mirror, but Ethan hadn't moved at all. Darkness swallowed the room as the bulb burst, shards of glass clinking softly against the wooden floor. Ethan stood frozen, his breath shallow, his skin cold. But the mirror, even in the pitch black, he could feel it looming in front of him. His own reflection had moved. He was sure of it. But he hadn't. A sharp creak echoed behind him, the closet door shifting, the bed frame settling. No, something else, something breathing. Ethan's fingers fumbled for his phone, desperate for light. He turned on the flashlight, the dim glow slicing through the darkness. He aimed it toward the mirror, and his stomach dropped. His reflection was still standing there, but it wasn't right. The figure in the glass was too still, its shoulders stiff, its chest not rising or falling. And then, as Ethan watched, horror clawing its way up his throat, it smiled, a slow, unnatural grin, spreading wider than his own mouth ever could. Ethan staggered back, his flashlight trembling in his grip. No, this wasn't real. His mind was playing tricks on him. It had to be. Then his reflection took a step forward. Not him, just the one in the mirror. The breath in Ethan's lungs turned to ice. The thing inside the mirror was getting closer, but he wasn't moving. He turned, ready to bolt for the door when, bang! The motel door slammed shut on its own. Ethan whirled back toward the mirror, panic seizing his body. The reflection stood right against the glass now. That same impossibly wide grin stretched across its face. Then, ever so slowly, it raised one hand and knocked. A muffled knock echoed from the other side of the mirror. Ethan's breath hitched. Then the reflection's head tilted sharply, its blackened eyes boring into his. Its lips moved, forming a single word, though no sound came through the glass. "Let me out." A cold dread crawled up Ethan's spine. He staggered backward, reaching blindly for the door handle. His fingers found the knob. He twisted, pulled, locked. A whisper slithered through the room, not from the mirror this time, from the closet. You opened the door. The closet door creaked wider, and something inside began to crawl out. Ethan's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. His fingers clawed at the locked doorknob, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. Behind him, the closet door yawned open, revealing only darkness. Too much darkness for such a small space. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the entire room was sinking into something unseen. Then came the sound, a wet, sickening shuffle. Ethan turned his flashlight toward the closet, his shaking hands barely able to hold the beam steady. And then it emerged. At first, it looked wrong, like a shape that didn't know how to be human. Limbs too long, skin stretched tight over something that wasn't bone. But as it stepped into the light, Ethan's stomach twisted. It was him, not an exact copy, but almost. The same height, the same face, but distorted. Its mouth too wide, its skin too smooth, as if it had been sculpted rather than born. And those eyes, black pits that swallowed the light. The thing tilted its head, observing him the way a predator observes prey. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, and Ethan's reflection in the mirror raised the same hand in perfect sync. His lungs locked, two of them, one in the mirror, one standing in the room with him. The thing grinned wider, wider, too wide, and then it moved. Ethan stumbled back, barely dodging as it lunged. It wasn't fast, but it moved wrong, like a puppet on tangled strings. The door! He had to get to the door. He fumbled with the knob, yanking at it again, and again. Still locked. Then, a whisper. "Trade places!" It came from both of them, the reflection in the mirror and the thing in the room. Their voices layered, overlapping, echoing inside his head. Ethan clenched his teeth. No, he wasn't going to let this thing take him. His eyes darted around, searching for anything that could help. Then, in the dim light, he saw it. The mirror's edge was cracked. The motel was old, the glass fragile. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed the closest object, a heavy bedside lamp, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, fragments exploding outward in a glittering cascade. The reflection let out a sound, not a scream, not human, as the shards fell, breaking its form into jagged pieces. The thing in the room jerked, its movements glitching, faltering, its body twisted violently, its face contorting into something unreadable. Then, with a sickening crack, it collapsed into itself and was gone. The air in the room shifted, the suffocating pressure lifting. The door, once locked, creaked open on its own. Ethan didn't wait. He ran. Through the hallway, past the front desk, straight into the night air, where he gulped in deep, shaking breaths. The neon motel sign buzzed overhead, flickering like it always had, as if nothing had happened. But Ethan knew better. As he turned back, staring at the dim hallway beyond the front desk, he saw it. Room 209's door was closed again, and from the jagged remains of the broken mirror, a single shard reflected something impossible. A figure still stood inside the room, watching him leave, and smiling.